Modi is going to play on this fear of politics of fear. How do the Muslims in that country fit in then? I mean, because they're always going to be the other.
India is not an autocracy. It's not a liberal democracy either, because the people who took the risk of elections do not follow the rule of law. And democracy is not only the voting pattern. I mean, it's not only elections. It's also the rule of law. Narendra Modi is now the high priest of Hinduism, is also the chowkidar, the protector of India against all the threats posed on the country, is the one who has made India great again. A decade of jihadi attacks has certainly created a sense of insecurity that could be exploited, instrumentalized by the internationalist party.
You've talked about how security leads into this need and desire for security is leading into what Modi is representing to Indians, and that's why they may vote him in again, and he's expected obviously to win. So how does Hindutva fit into that security need as well? Do you think the rise of Hindutva is also being driven by these security needs?
You know, this is fear politics. This is politics of fear. Politics of fear and politics of anger. You know, the idea of the angry young man, the angry Hindu young man, the angry Hanuman, because that was one of the stickers they publicized, the angry Hanuman, was a reflection of this deep feeling that is easily used in politics in terms of emotion. In Modi's BJP, in Modi's India, the leader is everything. So when the leader goes, what remains of the organization?
Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with GVS Dialogue. I'm joined today by one of South Asia's most eminent scholars, Dr. Christophe Jaffrelot. He's a professor at King's College London, president of the French Political Association, and a non-resident scholar at Carnegie. He's the author of many, many books on South Asia, including Modi's India, India's First Dictatorship, Pakistan's Paradox, and his latest book, just published in 2024, is Gujrat Under Modi, a laboratory of today's India. It's going to be linked in the description below, so please do get it. This is going to be a fascinating discussion. He is one of those international scholars with over 40 years of experience. So really a lot to add to our value of understanding in the region. Christophe, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I want to start off with, today is the world's largest elections are happening in India on April the 19th, and they conclude on June the 4th. A lot of things have been happening coming up to these elections, including the arrest of the chief minister of Delhi. The Congress party's bank accounts were frozen. Tax accounts suddenly appeared after decades. One of India's most famous vloggers, Dhruv Rathi, who got over 60 million views on his videos, and there might be even more by now, talks about how India is going towards a dictatorship. I mean, what are your thoughts on the state of democracy in India?
Well, it's not a liberal democracy anymore, for sure, but it's not a dictatorship the way China or Russia is a dictatorship. You know, we have entered, not only in India, but in many other countries, including Turkey or Israel or Hungary, into a new political system that I call authoritarian electoralism. You know, you have elections. All these countries have elections. Of course, you may say there are elections also in China and Russia, but well, these are not the same kind of elections. In places like India, Israel, Hungary, Turkey, there are elections because the strong man at the helm needs to take the risk of elections for getting the legitimacy, for getting the mandate, the popular mandate. Something that will allow him to say, I am the people. And because I am the people, I prevail. And I prevail over institutions, including the judiciary. I can reform the judiciary and so on and so forth. So yes, India is not an autocracy. It's not a liberal democracy either, because the people who took the risk of elections do not follow the rule of law. And democracy is not only the voting pattern. I mean, it's not only elections. It's also the rule of law. And elections are not free and fair if you don't have the rule of law that is still prevailing. We see that today. We see that the Election Commission is not doing its job properly. All the institutions are intimidating the opposition parties. As you said, political leaders are behind bars, not only Arvind Kejriwal, but Soren and others. And what they do, what the BJP does is not only to intimidate, not only to use the stick, but also the carrot to push, to make opposition leaders shift to the BJP itself. So for the first time in the history of India, you have in the fray today something like 25% of the BJP candidates who were in an opposition party last week or last month. They've been intimidated and they have been attracted simultaneously to the ruling party. So that's why I say India is certainly now an illiberal democracy. I would add it's also an ethnic democracy. Now, ethnic democracy is a word we used for Israel. It's a formula an Israeli political scientist, Sami Smoa, has introduced to describe a system where you have citizens who are less equal than others. And definitely Palestinians in Israel are not full-fledged citizens. Well, similarly in India today, minorities are not as equal as Hindus, de facto, but also de jure, because the laws making interreligious marriages very difficult, making conversion out of Hinduism very difficult, have been passed recently. And on the top of it, the Citizenship Amendment Act in 2019 made it impossible for non-Muslim refugees from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan to become Indians the same way as non-Muslims. So it's an ethnic democracy and an illiberal democracy, not a liberal democracy anymore.
So does it really matter if India is moving towards an authoritarian type government? Because there was a recent survey by Pew where 85% of Indians supported an authoritarian government. So why are we so worried if there is an authoritarian government?
Well,
if I can just add to that, if that government is delivering for the people and the people are happy with that form of government.
Well, whether the government is delivering for the people remains to be seen, because you have inequalities of a new kind in the country. We have never had such a high rate of unemployment, especially for the youth. And the system for giving food at a subsidized price that had been introduced during the COVID pandemic has been continued because 800 million people need this kind of support from the government for survival. So you can't say that mass poverty has diminished, certainly. Now, the question you ask is slightly different. You may be starving, you may still support a government that gives you something that is immaterial in a way, that is a sense of dignity, a sense of recognition. It is very emotional. Narendra Modi is now the high priest of Hinduism, is also the chokidar, the protector of India against all the threats posed on the country. He is the one who has made India great again, if you want, by organizing the G20 meeting, being well received, very well received by Joe Biden, by Emmanuel Macron. So you certainly do not vote in a country like India only because of socio-economic considerations and emotional issues, fear, anger, dignity play a big role, and sometimes also security. You prefer security to liberty. It's not only in India, by the way. So the trade-off also explains that, this trade-off also explains that so many middle-class people especially are not so keen on democracy anymore if they think the strong man and the helm gives them security.
Is that quite unusual for developing countries or middle-income countries, as India now is described as?
It's not so exceptional. Erdogan has not delivered at all. The economy is in doldrums in Turkey, and he could get away with it. Interestingly, in Turkey like in India, or in India like in Turkey, the strong man gets the support of the voters, not his party at the local or state level. There is a disconnect because these strong men appear as above accountability. They are not accountable. They are above. They are so exceptional characters. You support them blindly. The party they represent, of course, is punished for what it does at the local level, at the state level. So in India, the disconnect between state elections and national elections is really fascinating because we saw that in 2019. In 2019, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh had just voted BJP out of power just 6 months before the general elections. And BJP, because of Modi, swept the poll. Clean sweep of all the seats. So this disconnect is certainly a very interesting reconfirmation that we are in a different political system where what you do socioeconomically in terms of policies hardly matters.
In your book, you mentioned this term, which I found interesting, Moditva. Is that what you're relating to? What do you mean by that term?
Yeah, Moditva is not something I coined as a formula. It was there in the media in Gujarat when he was chief minister. And it's something very evocative because it puts together Hindutva and Narendra Modi. And I think there is indeed a very specific construct, political register introduced by him only. Of course, Hindu nationalism was there before. Hindutva was there before. Hindutva is now 100 years. The book Hindutva, Who is a Hindu, by Savarkar was published in 1923. And RSS, the organization, was started in 1925. And Modi is a pure product of RSS. In my book, I describe how he joined as a child, how he became a full-time cadre of the party, first of the organization, RSS itself, and then he was seconded to BJP and became an organizing secretary. He is a pure product of Hindutva. But he has given BJP something more, something different. And that is, first, populism. He is a populist. He is someone who relates to the people in a very specific manner, the way populist does, as if he was the people. And he is, of course, a plebeian. He comes from a low caste background. So it helps to play that game, to play that role. Plus, in Gujarat, he could, of course, constantly attack the establishment, and especially the Nehru-Gandhi family. But more than that, he was also very good at using social media, at using holograms, at relating directly to the voters. And that's something he continues to do because immediately after he became prime minister, he introduced this monthly program, Man Ki Baat. And Man Ki Baat is for Modi an opportunity every month to speak on radio to the ear of the poor. The radio is clearly the media the poor prefers. They can't afford a TV set, some of them, many of them. So it's style, it's a style. Moditva, it's Hindutva plus the populist style of politics.
Right. So, I mean, what comes out for me is that you're suggesting that there's a cult of personality that's going on here, and that's where the Moditva is coming in. And he's the Hindu embodiment of that cult. So how is that different from having a cult around? I mean, his supporters would say Congress Party has this cult around the Gandhi family or Nehru.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
No, there are similarities with Indira Gandhi. A lot of similarities. She was also a populist. She was the first one to use the radio, by the way, and she was the first one to also tour the country and that's a word I've not used yet, but it's very important, disintermediate relationship with the voters, the citizens.
Say that word again.
Well, to disintermediate means what? You do not need a party. You do not need an organization. So Mrs. Gandhi did that. She really short-circuited the party leaders of Congress. He does the same. He does the same. In fact, he is canvassing for state elections to such an extent that the voters don't know who will be the chief minister if BJP wins, because he is the only canvasser. So there are many similarities with Mrs. Gandhi. And by the way, incidentally, both of them suffer from a deep sense of insecurity. They don't have the kind of education, they don't have the kind of upbringing which make you safe. So, for instance, to interact with others, to interact with journalists, to give press conferences in the first place is something they don't do because they are too much afraid of questions they could not address properly. Well, Nehru was very different. Nehru was definitely a different kind of animal. And first of all, a team player, someone who was in a position to consult and democratically put to vote decision. And when he lost this election, so to speak, this vote, he bowed to the majority. He did not want the map of India to be redesigned according to the linguistic criteria in the 50s, but he did it. So many examples of his democratic inclinations. Indira was very different, and Modi is similarly very different.
So in your... Sorry, go ahead.
No, just two examples of how autocratic and how, I would say, authoritarian vis-a-vis the federal states, the states, Narendra Modi has been. When he decided the demonetization, he withdrew 85% of the notes in circulation. He did not consult any chief minister. You make a decision like this one, so solitarily. That's even something the Reserve Bank of India was not fully part of. More recently, the lockdown was decided in 6 hours without any consultation of the state governments again. So the lack of coordination that it reflects is certainly another indication of a deep authoritarian personality.
So in your book that you just published, Modi's Gujarat, a lab of today's India, do you see indications of how Modi would take India towards a more... so what I want to understand is, we're now saying that, let's say, India is moving towards, and you called it electoral authoritarianism. Did you see indications of that in Gujarat, the same thing happening? Or did it get worse in Gujarat, or is it better in Gujarat? Tell us a little bit about that.
No, this is what I found so interesting. I think it's unique in the history of India and maybe in the history of the world that a political system is constructed at the regional level. Gujarat is 60 million people large, and then scaled up at a quasi-continental level. And you can replicate recipes that have worked, which have worked at the state level, at the national level. I would say 3 pillars mostly of this system have been fully replicated. One is, of course, polarization along ethno-religious lines. That was something he started with the pogrom in 2002 and You can say that after he took over, the lynching of Muslims by vigilante groups, the inauguration of the Ayodhya temple, all that fit in the same kind of polarization strategy. The other very important technique that he used was the capture of institutions, the police in the first place, the judiciary in subsequently, and that is something that has also worked at the national level, very surprisingly, because we thought the judiciary, the Supreme Court of India in particular, was much more resilient, but they could find ways and means for blackmailing the judges, for also give them post-retirement jobs, which explains some of the self-censorship. And more importantly, the collegium continues to select the members of the Supreme Court, but the government does not appoint them, does not appoint those they don't like. So at the end of the day, they have the Supreme Court they want. And thirdly, you have a political economy. The political economy of Modi's Gujarat was very much based on a supply-side economy, a pro-rich policy, and crony capitalism. And crony capitalism is now flourishing in India. Some of the oligarchs, including Gautam Adani, experiencing a meteoric rise, benefiting from privatization, from so many, I would say, privileges. When you have these three pillars experimented in Gujarat and then nationalized, you have the ingredient of a system that is definitely illiberal. Plus, of course, but we have mentioned that before, his own persona, his own populist style. That's something he tried in Gujarat first. That's where he learned how to be the man of the people, the Hindu Hriday Samrat, the emperor of the Hindu earth, and then the Chowkidar, the protector, and then the Vikas Purush, the man for development. All these tags were acquired by him in Gujarat and then transferred to the national scene.
So you've talked about how security leads into this need and desire for security is leading into what Modi is representing to Indians, and that's why they may vote him in again, and he's expected obviously to win. So how does Hindutva fit into that security need as well? Do you think the rise of Hindutva is also being driven by the security needs?
Definitely. And that's something we absolutely need to factor in. This is a very important variable. The impact of jihadist attacks on India. By the late 1990s, you have Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, so many organizations, first of all, infiltrating Jammu and Kashmir, and then having other kinds of attacks, as early as 1999, the Red Fort in Delhi, 2001, the Parliament of India in Delhi. And of course, Bombay. Bombay has been attacked many times, including, naturally, in November 2008. Well, a decade of jihadi attacks has certainly created a sense of insecurity that could be exploited, instrumentalized by the Hindu Nationalist Party.
But in the last 5 years, I don't think they saw any significant kind of attacks.
No, of course not. Of course
then
not.
Why do they still have this sense of insecurity that they need Modi to that Modi is tapping into?
Well, first of all, you can continue to claim that there are risks. No, for instance, in 2016, 2017, 2018, the government of India arrested 16 people known as the Bhima Koregaon accused because they were suspected of trying to assassinate the Prime Minister of India. No, you can cultivate this sense of insecurity by propagating this kind of fake news, because of course we now know that that was not true. By the way, this is exactly what happened in Gujarat itself. When you add fake encounters between 2003 and 27, the Gujarat police killing something like half a dozen of so-called Muslim terrorists who were supposed to have a plan of assassinating Narendra Modi. So you do not need real threat for cultivating a sense of insecurity.
Mm-hmm. And how does the fact that the Congress party during this period that you mentioned, especially from 2000 till Modi took over in 2014, there were large periods of Congress party governments in that period. How do you think they played into the fact that they were felt that, you know, maybe they didn't do enough for India, and the role of Pakistan? How would you fit those together?
Well, certainly Congress could be accused of not being sufficiently security oriented. But I think that's a little bit unfair, and to cope with infiltrations of that kind is definitely something nobody could resist easily. But they could certainly appear as weak, and they've been probably accused with some impact on the Indian public opinion of being too weak. But I would say that's not the main reason why they became so unpopular. That was one of the reasons. But in 2014, they were also accused of corruption. The Anna Hazare movement played a big role. And I think that's the tag they could not easily get rid of. That was a little bit of a propaganda again, but that was probably affecting them more than anything else.
So one thing that I have often thought about is to what extent Pakistan is directly responsible for the rise of Hindutva in terms of its security policies.
Yeah, well, as I said, the Islamist attacks have played a role, have made some impact on the psyche of the Hindu majority, but that has been instrumentalized, that has been exploited by the BJP propaganda. And especially in Gujarat, Narendra Modi could not fight any election without designating Pakistan as its main enemy. In 2007, for instance, he made a campaign that was directed against Musharraf, which was a little bit out of proportion. So you have certainly an element of truth. You have certainly a real threat, but you can exploit that, magnify that, and create fear. You know, this is fear politics. This is politics of fear. Politics of fear and politics of anger. Because people who are fearful are angry. They are not happy of being fearful, especially when they are supposed to be safe in their own country. And they played a lot on that. You know, the idea of the angry young man, the angry Hindu young man, the angry Hanuman, because that was one of the stickers they publicized, the angry Hanuman, was a reflection of this deep feeling that is easily used in politics in terms of emotion.
So a lot of it's just propaganda and increasing the concept of threat, of fear, so that Modi can win it. So why have we not seen this rise of Hindutva in the South then? Because, I mean, if this fear of, you know, security exists within the country, why specifically in the northern parts of India and not in the southern India?
There are many reasons. First of all, the threat from Pakistan and in the north is much more than in the south. The same way the Kashmir issue is much more palpable in Lahore than in Karachi. You know, it's a geographical consideration. Secondly, the level of education is so different in the south. You can't fool educated people the same way You can't instrumentalize emotions the same way. They are much more interested in socioeconomic issues, and that makes a big difference. And thirdly, the level of integration, osmosis between Hindus and minorities, Christians as well as Muslims, is much higher. So to designate the Muslim as the other is much more difficult, because he is not that different. He speaks Tamil, he speaks Malayalam, he is integrated. So for all these reasons, plus, of course, a very important point, the North Indian party, that is BJP, keeps insisting on having Hindi as the language of the country. And of course, Dravidian states will resist that. They resist that. They resist also the fact that they are paying for the poor of the North. The South today pays for the North to a great extent, and that's another reason why they are resentful.
It's interesting. I read a statistic that even Muslims, the number of Muslims who can speak write Urdu has gone dramatically down. I think 7, 8, 9% or something like that. I read somewhere. So if Modi is going to play on this fear of politics of fear, how do the Muslims in that country fit in then? I mean, because they're always going to be the other. So do they have a future under Modi? I mean, what is their future looking like? Is it going to get any better if Modi is replaced by Congress? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, the worst case scenario is, and that's why I make the comparison with Israel a lot. The worst case scenario is the transformation of Muslims as second-class citizens, ghettoized, excluded from mixed neighborhoods, not socioeconomically able to reach the professions they would deserve. Also, the decline in terms of education has started in places like Uttar Pradesh, where we have seen for the first time the percentage of upper caste Muslims going to the university declining. So that's a kind of spiraling kind of effect. And in the worst case scenario also says, well, it doesn't matter who rules. It may be Congress again, but it would hardly make any difference because it's deeply ingrained in society. It's not only a political issue, it's also a societal issue. And therefore, you can't undo the laws I have mentioned, making conversion almost impossible, making religious marriages almost impossible, making the purchasing of a flat in a mixed neighborhood almost impossible. You have laws now in some states when you have to ask for the permission of the district collector before selling your flat or your house to someone who is not from your community. And of course, when a Hindu wants to sell something to a Muslim in a mixed neighborhood, that is refused. So ghettoization is also the end result of this. So that's the worst case scenario, definitely. The possibilities of returning to a more humane, a more egalitarian, a more secular polity, I think, is not ruled out. The point of no return has not been reached, but for how long? This is of course a big question, because after this election, if BJP wins, we'll see more laws, we'll see more transformations in the same direction. A uniform civil code possibly will be the next step, something like that.
Do you see BJP having a future without Modi? Because you said very much that there's this cult of personality going on.
Well, again, the comparison with Indira Gandhi is very educative, because Indira Gandhi centralized the Congress to such an extent that she really weakened the party that his fathers and others had built. And Congress could never really recover from that. Well, BJP similarly today is becoming a one-man show when it used to be a very collegial party. In fact, RSS itself has a culture of collegiality. And incidentally, people don't even remember the name of the chiefs of RSS because chiefs do not matter in this organization. Well, they do in Modi's BJP, in Modi's India. The leader is everything. So when the leader goes, what remains of the organization? And this is definitely a very good question. That is something we can also examine comparatively, because when a populist, a national populist, leaves the scene, it's always very difficult for the successor to take up the mantle. You know, Maduro could not replace Chavez. Nobody could. Well, the list is very long of all the populist leaders who could not be replaced, really. Yeah. And the big question is: will there be a fight between Amit Shah, the Home Minister, and Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh? Will the RSS seize this opportunity to stage a comeback? They've been sidelined to a large extent by Modi. Can they, if he leave the scene, become the arbiter? I mean, the referee again? But you see, we can only speculate. These questions are very difficult to anticipate.
Okay, my last thought. What are the implications of all this happening in India for the rest of the world? Do we need to be worried, or we're just needlessly thinking about this?
No, when a big country like India stops being a democracy, it's a loss for everyone. First of all, it's a loss for South Asia. It's a big loss for the region. Now, at least the liberals of South Asia had one reference point next door that they could constantly look at with hope of emulating one day this wonderful political trajectory that had resisted for 70 years all kinds of extreme influence. Indian democracy is a common good for the humanity, like democracy everywhere. That's a formula Rahul Gandhi is using, and I think he's right. So it's a loss, definitely a loss. And also, there is one point that political scientists do, and I think rightly so. Democracies do not fight wars. Non-democracies do much more easily.
So, fight with each other?
Well, very few democracies have been at war. Very few democracies have been at war compared to non-democratic countries. The correlation between the rise of authoritarianism and the rise of armed conflict is very well documented. Of course, it's not an absolute correlation, but there is a probability. The probability of becoming more aggressive when you become less democratic is greater. Yeah.
Christophe, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.